Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I'm Paul Ndiho, and joining me on Shaka Live is Shaka Sal himself. Sometimes I call him AKA the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you today?
Hugely terrific. Of course, again, we are in, guess what? This is the third week of January.
And a warm welcome to you, all our Facebook followers from all over the world. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka himself, and we'll be taking your comments and questions in a bit. But in the meantime, Shaka, last week, the President of the United States, Mr. Donald J. Trump, made some what would a lot of people have characterized as disparaging comments about some countries and African countries. He specifically used the term that a lot of people have said was very, very disparaging, and have actually called on him to retract that statement. But before we go any further, your thoughts?
You're talking about the 8-letter word?
Absolutely.
Well, first of all, let's face it, the president is on record denying that he actually ever used that word. There are also some people that seem to be on the same page with him, who happen to be in the room, who say that they did not in fact hear that 8-letter word. However, there are some other individuals who happen to be in that room, and one of them happens to be Illinois Democratic Senator. You call him Dick, or Richard Durbin.
The number 2 guy
in the Democratic Party.
Yes.
He says that he actually heard that word being uttered by the president. I was also watching television, and on CNN there was this very interesting congresswoman whose name is Mia Love,
the lady
Republican from Utah. The first ever black Republican woman to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives. And a lady who happens, of course, to come from 2 Haitian parents who moved to the United States from Haiti in the early 1970s. And according to her, who happened to be very strong supporters of President Trump, and in fact say they voted for him, she actually said, yes, I was not in that room, but from what I have heard, from everything I have heard, he seems to have actually mentioned that word. And if he did, he was asked, do you consider him a racist? And she said, yes, I think you would really have to do that. And he said, it is most unfortunate. So we really don't know exactly what happened, because as I talk to you too, I happen not to have been in that room. But from everything I have seen, and from the reactions, whether it is from African ambassadors from the United Nations, the African Union, whether it is from some African presidents like Seretse Khama, Ian Khama of Botswana, whether it is Macky Sall of Senegal, it seems that the President of the United States may in fact have mentioned that 8-letter word.
Shaka, even though we can't say the word on air, what do you think could have triggered the president? I mean, you are the President of the United States. Sometimes you make remarks and people take you seriously. What do you think was like the context? Try to put it in context for us, for people who don't understand the racial tensions in the United States, or for people who don't know how international politics is played at that level. Maybe try to bring us up to speed.
You're talking about President Trump, who really happens to be a human being, just like you and I, who also, therefore, must have grown up in a certain environment. And therefore, there are some situations where he may be ignorant about the reality of some of the things that he may actually be talking about. Because when you think about the African immigrants, you can't possibly even come up with preventing or not allowing African immigrants to come to the United States. if there is any immigrant community that has made incredible contributions to these United States of America, it has to be African immigrants. As a matter of fact, the fact will say that when you look at some of the public opinions, some of the research that has actually been conducted in most recent times, the African immigrant community happens to be one of the most educated, most intellectual in America. They have so many PhDs from some of the most important intellectual university institutions, master's degrees and what have you. So to say that you need immigrants from Norway, which obviously is a very good country, and I don't think, frankly, a lot of Norwegians would be interested in coming to the United States, because when you look at the United Nations annual index, human development index, Norway is constantly one of the top 5 countries where people will say it is the best place where to live, because things like education, things like healthcare, things like housing, all those things are rights. They are not privileges. Whereas, in fact, in the United States, for the most part, those are privileges, not rights. Yes, the Norwegians have one of the highest, life expectancy, because obviously they go about things very, very well, because for them, life is about human beings. They put the human being at the center. Mm. Now, when you talk about Africans, again, who come here, like I said, there have been some of the most educated as a community. You're not talking about people that just, stay on welfare and what have you. You're talking about doctors. You're talking about super intellectuals. You're talking about lawyers, engineers. You're talking about journalists. You're talking about all sorts of people that you can think about. Mm. And you also wonder why Africa really had to come on his mind, especially when, in fact, we are like celebrating the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr., a descendant of Africa, a man who, as you know, played a very, very prominent role during the civil rights movement and what have you. And in fact, as a result of that, not only did he win a Nobel Peace Prize for that, he's also considered by many Americans, as the conscience of America. Mm. So we talk about 3 people in America who Americans think about very much. They are basically 3 human beings here. One is General George Washington, who is considered to be the father, in fact, or the founding father of the Republic of the United States of America. You talk about Thomas Jefferson. When you talk about democracy, you talk about the Jeffersonian democracy. Mm-hmm. He was one of the key principal authors of the Declaration of Independence of the United States. So the other person you talk about really is a Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who himself is on record for having actually said that he had a dream that one day his children would be judged not by the color of their skin, not the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So you can imagine a man like President Trump happens to be a beneficiary of all that information, that knowledge, that experience, and yet for some reason he finds Africa short. You talk about Haiti. Yes, there's some people who can say, you know what? Haiti became independent in 1804. How come? How come Haiti is not one of the most progressive, one of the most prosperous countries in the Western Hemisphere? But there is a lot of history that a lot of people don't know. Because when those people went on rebellion against the French, it was very, very, deliberately decided by the French, and later by the American cousins, that Haiti should not really work, because if it works, at that time, you know, the situation was when black people were slaves in this country, that they would inspire, influence the behavior of those who were slaves in this country, and therefore it would be a totally different ball game. So it's a very, very long story, really. It's not something that we can really begin and talk about and complete. Then you talk about El Salvador. I mean, I really don't know why he picked up, you know, those three countries, but it was very, very most unfortunate.
Let's talk about the reaction so far coming from most African countries. I know all African countries represented at the United Nations came up with a very a good statement demanding a retraction. We've seen some presidents who have reacted, demanding, calling, actually summoning the U.S. diplomats accredited those countries to come and explain. How about that?
Yeah, of course, as I said, Botswana did that, so did Senegal.
Ghana?
Yeah, but a lot of African countries, you're talking about 55 really countries, so to speak. You're talking about the members of the African Union, and when it comes to the United Nations, there are only 54 recognized. But so far, you don't have more than 5 countries that have come out. And I think, frankly, I think also this gives an opportunity, sincerely, to African leaders to begin sincerely looking at themselves through the mirror. What are we doing? Why don't we create enabling conditions that make sure that our people do not die in the Mediterranean trying to go to greener pastures in Europe? Why do they continue going to cross the Atlantic and what have you? When in fact, let's face it, when you look at the national security interests of the United States or Europe or China, you are talking about the wealth of Africa. You're talking about all these minerals, frankly, that are being extracted, exploited by foreigners for developing themselves. And yet, Africans are sitting on this gold, diamond, oil, and what have you. But guess what? It does not benefit the ordinary African. So I think this is an opportunity, sincerely, for African leaders to look inside themselves and figure out how to come up with policies that help the people of Africa. So I think that it is also a good thing that the President of the United States was able to say that. But having said that, I think, again, it is most unfortunate because people will obviously associate him with being ignorant. They will look at him as perhaps being racist, even though he has said that he is not racist, and he probably isn't. He is definitely entitled to his opinion as an individual. He can think about a lot of things and probably express them, but as a president of a country and the only superpower on this planet Earth, I think that's not in his league.
Let's go to the comments, Shaka. Let's start with Namfuna Lydia. Trump told us the truth. Is it that our leaders have failed Africans? Could it be that the reason a lot of Africans are trying to immigrate from Africa coming to the United States is because of our own leaders? Our own leaders can't create environments where we can work peacefully, where we can grow and nurture our ambitions.
It is very true, but you see, migration is not only limited to Africans, really, because when you look at the history of the world, for example, when you look at a man like Trump, where do you think he came from?
Germany.
He may have been born in the United States, yes, but what about his parents or his parents' parents? So let's face it, it's a two-way traffic. When you look at the Europeans in South Africa, who for many, many decades presided over apartheid and what have you, where did they come from? They came from Europe. They came from what we call Holland, and others came from France and what have you. When you look at the people who are in Australia, in charge of Australia as we know it, where did they come from? They came from Europe, they came from the United Kingdom as we know it. When you look at people who are in New Zealand, You look at people who were in Canada. You look at people who, for the most part, ruled Latin America for centuries. Where did they come from? They came from Spain, Brazil. They came from Portugal. So I think, look, let's face it, when you talk about life, it should be an equal opportunity employer. I think people should be free to have aspirations, to have dreams, and to follow their stars wherever it takes them, so that they can benefit, they can also help to develop those societies where they end up. But having said that, again, I'll have to reiterate that this should be a great opportunity for African rulers. And I don't call them leaders, because in fact, if they were leaders, they would have had to do that earlier. They are rulers. They only think about their stomachs. They're patriotic to their stomachs, the stomachs of their families and friends, not society, not community, not countries, because they have a great opportunity to harness the God-given resources, provide the necessary skills to their people so that they can exploit and benefit from those resources.
Let's go to another Facebook comment, maybe from Robert Rebanjira. S-Holes only describes the characteristics of people from third world countries. In terms of social welfare services, we can make our countries amazing places by doing what the United States is doing in our own countries.
Of course it is doable. In fact, people already do it in very non-governmental kind of communities. I mean, when you talk about social welfare, we do have in Africa extended relationships. We do simply have a situation where, for example, a child is raised by a community, by a village. All people in that neighborhood pretty much, work together, they interact, they support each other, they complement and supplement each other. But what is absent and what is missing really is the governments or systems of governments in Africa to take up that type of value so that they can begin to provide the necessary security to their populations. But until you get democracy, whether we like it or not, we are not going to go there. Some of the richest, most prosperous, and most well-governed countries in the world, they come from the Scandinavian countries. We're talking about Norway. We're talking about Sweden. We're talking about Denmark. We're talking about Finland. We can even talk about the Netherlands and what have you. We can talk about all those places. Why is it that we talk about them very much? Is because they put the human being at the center. They make sure that the essentials that any human being needs are not privileges of the few. They are rights for every human being that walks their streets, walks their neighborhoods. That's where you find for example, the most, life expectancy. They are on top. If you look at the United Nations Human Development Index, the first 5 countries are almost constantly in the northern, in the Scandinavian countries.
Interesting. Let's go to another, talking about development. There is a comment from Valentine Vadesto. Even if most Africa is behind in terms of development, it does not deserve to be abused in that way, especially by a president of a country that everybody looks up to.
Yeah, it is very true. But then again, let's face it, in order for you not to set yourself up for being abused or being looked down upon, you have to first and foremost respect yourself. Africa has no excuse in not working towards developing itself, respecting itself first and foremost, so that people elsewhere can begin to look at Africa and Africans as legitimate citizens of this planet Earth. But let's face it, if you look deeper into history, in fact, current information, unless of course if that information has been overtaken by some recent archaeological discoveries and what have you, the first human being from the little island actually came from Africa. We're talking about Old Gorge.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of people are attentively paying attention. And there is another comment from Amos Chisisi. African countries have vast resources which are being stolen by Americans and Europeans. That being said, does that mean that they should steal our stuff and then abuse us?
Yeah, but how are they stealing Africa's stuff? They must be collaborating with some individuals. It's a sort of dynamic, a dialectic, so to speak. So you're talking about some elements within Africa itself. They could be presidents, they could be ministers, they could be ambassadors, they could be governors, they could be business people and what have you. They are obviously working in collaboration with these other elements or governments from outside for their own selfish interests, not for national interests or Pan-African interests. What is needed is again having leaders like the founding fathers of African countries. For example, we're talking about the Ghanaian founding president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, for example. He talked and even wrote about the African personality. Africa needs dignity. You're talking about the founding president of what used to be Tanganyika and later became Tanzania, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. In fact, there was a time when he said, as far as he was concerned, yes, there were so many resources in Tanzania. We're talking about gold, we're talking about gas, we're talking about timber and all sorts of things. And he said, you know what? We are not going to extract these resources until Tanzanians are in a position where they have acquired the necessary skills to benefit from these resources.
Interesting. Let's go to another comment from Wimwana Muyobo. It's every citizen's role to do something about this kind of stuff. Bit by bit, Africa will go forward. We should direct our efforts to building Africa.
We should, there's no question about it. But look, for example, at some of the countries that are most endowed with what is called black gold until recently. We're talking about oil. We're talking about Nigeria. We're talking about Angola. We're talking about Gabon. We're talking about Equatorial Guinea. These are countries that are so rich in terms of resources. They have helped other countries develop. But look at those countries themselves. Other than the individuals who have power at a certain point in time, who actually have houses, for example, in America, in Potomac. I have seen a lot of houses belonging to Nigerians, former governors, presidents, ministers, generals, and stuff like that in the Potomac. I have met some of these people who even have houses in Hempstead outside of London, who have houses in Rio de Janeiro and all that kind of stuff, who have houses in Pretoria, in Cape Town, in Johannesburg, and you name it. But when you look at the vast majority of their people, they live in subhuman conditions. Why? Because they don't provide leadership. There is a leadership deficit in Africa. This business of individuals who really are essentially selfish, again, like I said, who are patriotic to their stomachs, the stomachs of their families and friends. We don't need that kind of leaders. Africa does not need those type of people. It needs new leaders, young people who are exposed, who are disciplined, who are very patriotic to their countries, to their continent, and who, frankly, are people that promote African dignity, integrity, and character.
Speaking of character, let's go to another comment from Adnabi Adebo. He says, Shaka, if you are to go by the media, if Tanzania's president, if what is said in the media are being quoted by the... Okay, sorry, let me repeat that. If going by the media, Tanzanian president said that Africa needs to demonstrate growth democratically, and that's why he's rejecting the extension of term limits in his country. Should other leaders look up to him if he followed through with that?
There's no question about it, except that has to go beyond simply rejecting, for example, removing term limits so that he can personally benefit from being, an occupant of State House. He has also to embrace some other democratic fundamental values. We're talking about the freedom, frankly, of expression, freedom of press, which is under attack in Tanzania. We're talking about John Pombe Magufuli. He has to allow the fact that people have political parties, and these political parties have a right to organize and mobilize, and that you cannot simply rule a country as if, in fact, it was a military barracks. So he has to go beyond that, but we have to obviously give him credit for standing tall by rejecting some of these political opportunists who essentially are telling him to remove term limits so that not only can he stay in the State House for that long, but that they can also, of course, they can also in turn be rewarded by very important positions which they can then use to exploit their own societies for personal interests.
What are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow we're looking at, child marriages, basically. We're talking about a situation where in Africa, for the most part, you have girls who are below 18, Paul, and they get married simply because sometimes there are these economic pressures. The parents want to have some cows, dowry, and what have you, and they let their young girls, get married, and it causes sometimes a lot of socio-economic, cultural problems.
Let's go to a final comment. Rod Cash. We still have a long way before we can start developing as Africa. As long as our leaders continue being patriotic only to their dear stomachs, we will always be called names by leaders from foreign countries.
That is very true, because frankly, you don't expect others to respect you if you do not first and foremost respect yourself. I think, as the English saying goes, charity begins at home.
Any final thoughts, Shaka?
About what?
Okay. We are running out of time. I think we'll continue our conversation next week. Thank you so much again for being a great guest. And I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time.
You're most welcome, Ndugu.
Yeah. Thank you.